OTB AM.
It is time for Laois Mt Rushmore. It is the big one this morning, I would say, according to Cliona Foley and according to Shane Keegan. They're both on standby. We'll start with you, Cliona. This is a big moment for you. This is a big moment for your county as the OTB selector this morning. Are you feeling the pressure?
I'm feeling terrible pressure, the only time to ever represent my county, and God forgive me for what I may be about to do or bring down a pops.
So for anybody who's just joining our series for the first time, here is how it works. We have our OTB selector, who is Cliona. She is going to pick the 4 names that she feels belongs on Laois Sporting Mt Rushmore. Then Shane will come along and ruthlessly remove one of them from the mountain and put another one up. There's possibly even more pressure that comes with that, Shane. How are you feeling?
Yeah, definitely feeling the pressure on, no doubt about it. It's amazing. I threw it out on Twitter a night or two ago that myself and Cliona were going to be doing this, and I think I got 32 names back within the first hour or so. So there's definitely not a general consensus. I think the only thing guaranteed is that we're going to get this wrong.
Whatever is left of my reputation is about to be shattered.
So before we get into your first pick, Cliona, how have you thought about this? Has there been a list of criteria that you've gone through?
Yeah. I looked and I've watched several of these over the weeks and been fascinated by them. But I think for me, if we are talking about Mount Rushmore, then there has to be certain things that a Mount Rushmore should capture. For me, sport is about more than one sport. I think that's really important, and I think Laois reflects that. I think you should capture something of the history, the important history of a county. If you're going to have a Mount Rushmore, I think it's got to have some historical significance. It has to be about excellence, but I think it has to be about the spirit of a county. And as Shane would say, we're humble people in Laois, but that doesn't mean we don't have lots of pride.
Well, let's do it. Let's get into the first pick, Cliona. Who have you gone for? Sorry, Adrian.
Before we do that, just like, because we've done, I think it's important at this stage, we've done, when we've had Meath on, we've got the stuff about, it's a GA county and it's a racing county. We had Wicklow on, they were GA and boxing, obviously. We'd Sligo on, they didn't know what the hell they were. What sort of a county is Laois in terms of sporting lineage?
Well, I grew up, as I say, we don't have the lineage of, the Kerry All-Irelands. We don't have all of that, but I grew up in a place called Abbeyleix near Portlaoise, and it was a town that had a very eclectic mix of sport in it, and Portlaoise was our biggest town, and it was a town that had rugby in it, it had basketball in it, it had GA in it, obviously, and also I would always have regarded Laois as an athletics county as well, and it produced some really good athletes, and some athletes like Monica Riley from my own town who went to America on scholarship. So, it was that kind of it's a kind of a county, I think, that has a very eclectic mix. We're in the middle of the country, and I think because we're in the middle of the country, we were influenced by lots of other things as well.
Yeah, I'd echo that. I think we are predominantly a GAA county. We might be a GAA county that have been somewhat starved of success. But yeah, we are definitely a GAA county. Look, we don't have your high profile golfers or really high profile, I suppose, rugby internationals or something like that some of the rest would have, I suppose, and certainly being given that my own sport to be soccer, we certainly haven't had too much success on that front. So I mean, when I was looking at it, I suppose I would have divided it into 4 lists. I would have had 6 hurlers, 6 footballers, 4 rugby players, and then 5 people who fell under the heading other. So fairly eclectic mix, yeah.
We may as well.
Yep.
We may as well get cracking on it. So, Cliona, your first pick, is this possibly the one that was a no-brainer? I think possibly the most famous GAA figure to ever come out of the county.
Yes, and none of us speaking this morning ever saw him play, but. And Shane's right, like it is a big GAA county, obviously, Laois, but you can't look past Tommy Murphy, I think. In all of the, recent GAA success we've had in hurling and football, I don't think anybody can look past Tommy Murphy. So who's Tommy Murphy? The Tommy Murphy Cup famously is called after him. The GAA named it in the late 90s, but he was known as the Boy Wonder, and there was a very good reason for that. Any man with a nickname like that deserved it, clearly. He played for Laois Minors at 15, but he played for the Laois Seniors when he was 16. He actually played in an All-Ireland semi-final, a replay against Kerry that they lost by a point. when he was 16, which is sensational. So he was famous in the 30s, the 40s, the 50s. And loads of people will go, well, why do you pick somebody from then? And, you know, he made the team of the millennium in the GAA football. And he was the only one on that team who came from a county that didn't win an All-Ireland final. And his reputation was such that, like, he's in midfield with, guess who? Mick O'Connell. He's on a team in the millennium that included, you know, everybody from Pat Spillane, Mikey Sheehy, Sean O'Neill, Enda Collar and Sean Flanagan, John Joe Riley. That's the quality of people he's in there beside. And he went back and he scored a point, I think, in that game against Kerry. But the following year he won a Schools All-Ireland with Knockbeg. So that will tell you the kind of player he was. He was absolutely, no wonder he was called the Boy Wonder. Is there a question mark about Tommy Murphy in terms of, well, not a question mark, but how close to the border is he? How close to being a Carlow man is Tommy Murphy? Doing a little bit of research, even on current day Google Maps, it just shows how incredibly close the Gragecullen GAA club is to the Carlow border. It's literally metres away from the dotted line. So what we've actually got up on screen... Oh, geez, Owen, you're not going to start this route. I was just... because
you're getting into dangerous territory, Owen.
Step into this.
I remember doing a piece with Paul Rouse a couple of years ago on this, and how there had been a movement of the borders when it came to a couple of the GAA clubs, and thankfully his club was moved within the Laois border in the 20th century, or early in the 20th century, and therefore it's not up for debate, but you can see on screen just how close it is.
Yeah, no, look, borders are borders. You know, if you want to get into arguments with people, if you want to get into arguments with people in South Kilkenny as to the Kilkenny-Waterford border and Tip-Waterford border, look, he's a Laois man. He wore Laois colours. You know, as Cliona says, you know, I suppose one of the things I've really enjoyed about this is finding out more about fellas that you didn't know a whole pile about. And Tommy Murphy, I suppose, is the prime example of that. You would have known the bare bits and bones that most people have known about him before this, but getting ready for this, reading about him, I mean, that is phenomenal. And I suppose the best way, if you just needed one line to justify why he absolutely has to be in it, I mean, to be on that team of the millennium alongside Heffernan, Spillane, O'Connell, fellas like that, I mean, for a county, as I say, who we haven't had massive success in football, to have a fella to be classed in the same category as fellas like that. Look, there's a couple of names football-wise worth discussing who probably narrowly missed out, but I would agree with Cliona 100% that in football it's got to be Tommy Murphy for me as well. Yeah.
In the 80s, the GAA started a thing called the all-time All-Stars, but for players that there wasn't an All-Star series for when they were playing, and he was the second recipient of it. Bill Delaney was also a Laois man who won one of those as well. But like he started, I think, as I said, 16-year-old for Laois seniors in 1937, and he played all the way up to 1953. He was on Railway Cup teams. He was just accepted to have been the best midfielder of his time. And as I said, and I remember the rows around the time when the Millennium was being picked, and you know, all the debates around that, and yet there he is in the middle of it. And I think historically, for that reason, you know, to have somebody whose stature was so great, you'd have to have him on Laois Mt Rushmore. Yeah, it's remarkable because we often throw the tag at certain players about who is the best to not win in All-Ireland, and as you said, the only player in that team at the Millennium to have not done so really kind of speaks to how well thought of he was in the 20th century. We might just skip on to your second pick, Cliona. Who have you gone for? So my second pick is Keenan Buckley, a runner, a cross-country runner predominantly. But when I was growing up, obviously, again, one of these people who, you know, was constantly in the local paper and in the national papers, and a huge source of pride for us. The World Cross Countries in 2003, they celebrated the 30th anniversary, and I remember being at it and getting the book and discovering that she was the third-time all-time representative. She was the third woman in the world who had raced at the World Cross Countries most. But really, what was really interesting about her was And we forget, like, the quality of the world cross countries. First of all, anybody who's ever run cross country, if you go back to your days in school and you remember the days you tried to duck out when the teacher came looking for you to run cross country, people who run cross country are hard. These are the hardest, some of the hardest. Apart from marathon running, cross country running really tests your mettle. And Keenan Buckley not only represented Ireland 13 times, but she was twice made the top 20 in it. And in 2002, she was 10th overall. And remember, Sonia O'Sullivan was 7th, I think, that year. Ireland, she helped Ireland win a team bronze. She was 40 at the time. She gave up running, actually, when she became a mother. So she kind of didn't compete for 10 years, really. But that was the quality of the woman, that she came 10th in the world cross country when she was 40. So you imagine what her career could have been if perhaps she had, hadn't had children or hadn't gone running. And on top of that, then she was an inspirational manager of the Irish athletics cross country team for years. I think she managed it for 10 years. And in that time, people like Fionnuala Britton won European titles. She was just a brilliant person, brilliant runner. And as I said, I'd love to have seen what else she might have done had her life led her another way.
What's the story, Cliona, about people who, like you mentioned, I did a bit of cross country when I was younger as well. It's an amazing sport to be involved in, but it always felt like stepping stone to actual running.
To track, yeah.
for want of a track, exactly. Absolutely. So what's the story then? Why do
she would have won? Because I think if you love athletics, it is the toughest part of it, if you like. And also her track career was influenced by, she'd won an Irish track 3,000 metre title, actually. And then I think her track career kind of stopped because she had children. She kept running cross country, but not as competitively, and then kind of came back to it seriously. So I think, again, we don't know how great she would have been on the track, or indeed at marathon running possibly as well. But I just think amongst athletics people, you just understand how hard cross-country runners are. And, I would put her up there, Katrina McKiernan, Sonia O'Sullivan, Fionnuala Britton and Keenan Buckley. And, I mean, we know that at least 3 of those, we would always recognise them as world-class, and I think she was world-class as well.
No argument, Shane?
Absolutely no argument again. She's another one that I've no argument. Unfortunately for you, we'll shortly start to get to loggerheads. But no, look, she's another that I really enjoyed reading up about. I think one of the things Cliona touched on there is it's the longevity. I mean, there was a bit of history of it in the family. So she started at it very young. I think she said she was 10 or 11 when she first went down to Ballyfin Athletics Club, I think it was. But, I mean, to stay going as long as she did, I think, as Cliona said, to be on that team at 40, I think the following year at 41, she was second in the European cross countries. I mean, that's phenomenal. Stephen Miller did a very good interview with her a couple of years back. And in terms of getting back into it at that later stage, I found it interesting. She said the world cross countries were coming to Belfast in 99, and she said she had been at it in 79 when John Tracy ran, and I think that was her big motivation to get back training hard and try to have a second kind of burst at it, I suppose.
And remember, like, if people want to understand the quality of that race, when she was 40, that she finished 10th in, Ethiopia's Getawami won it, Paul Radcliffe was third, and Edith Masai was, or Paul Radcliffe was second, Edith Masai was third. Like, that was the quality of that race at the time. As I said, Sonia was 7th. So, like, she was mixing it with the top African runners in the world as well at that stage.
Yeah, someone at the very top of their field, and a proper leash person who was of world class in a given sport.
Yeah, and her own as well, I'd say too. I think her personality as well is what I makes her a leash, somebody who would be representative of leash up there as well. Like, totally low key, totally humble. Just, it's hard to describe how low key Anne Keenan Buckley is. But I've seen her manage, as I said, world teams, Irish teams at World and European Championships. And again, you wouldn't know she's in the room, but ask the athletes themselves, and they will tell you the influence that she had on them. Just a quiet, powerful, strong presence.
Very, very hard to make a case against your opening 2 Mount Rushmore picks. So they're both nailed on because we've both got agreement. Right, let's get on to pick number 3, Cliona. Who have you gone for?
Pick number 3 for me is Pat Critchley. I was lucky enough to go to college with him in PE College in Limerick many, many moons ago. He would be recognised, obviously, Laois's only hurling all-star. Brilliant hurler, and was part of that Laois team that made National League semi-finals in the 80s and lost the Centenary Cup to Cork actually in 85 or 84, I think, as well, wasn't it? But brilliant hurler. Brilliant basketball player. I was lucky enough to watch him play basketball and to have seen him play basketball. And Portlaoise is a big basketball town, and they played National League back then. He was part of a Portlaoise team that famously went down to Neptune to Cork and ran them to 7 points or something like that when Portlaoise didn't have any Americans and Neptune did. So just a sensational basketball player, but also the man behind so much success for other people, and he just epitomises that. Vincent Hogan once had a great line about him. He said, I think he was a man who easily retreated from his own reflection. I thought it was a lovely line. You can't. Also, I think the only intercounty player I know who played on stage at Foley, in a very famous band with Cheddar Plunkett was in it as well. I think he played lead hurl at one point. And later, I think, had a triangle and then an accordion. And they were called the Mere Mortals. They were the Drowning Fish initially, I think, and then they became the Mere Mortals. But himself and Cheddar Plunkett, remember as well, were responsible for the revival of Laois hurling, if you like, in the past decade. Started this idea of boy hurlers with the Setanta project, got young kids in Laois back loving hurling again. And he's a very, very, very creative, innovative coach, not just in basketball. He led a schools team in the girls' school in Portlaoise. They won multiple, I think, 11 All-Ireland titles basketball with him. He coached the women's football in Laois. We saw him recently bring Sigerson Cup, bring Carlow IT to Sigerson Cup final. If this man puts his mind to it, there is nothing he can't do. And I particularly think he should be up there for the way that he represents coaches as well.
Looking at some of go on, Adrian, sorry.
Yeah, just in terms of the style, then, Cliona, like you mentioned, innovation as a coach and like the cross section of sport is incredible. Was there anything, a thread common to those? Like sometimes you'll see somebody who's extremely good at one sport will have a lot of traits that can carry across. Any indication of that? Sort of tell us about.
Well, as a player, he was one of these guys who had all the time. You know, those players who always had all the time on the ball that, you know, and even watching him playing basketball. His nickname is Zoom. I think he could probably got it in college. Largely for the fact that he always looks as if he's going at about 0 miles an hour personally, unless you put a ball in front of him. And he was always late for everything in college as well. And I think that was where the nickname came from. But, you know, when you're doing those people who always had time on the ball, you see the time seemed to suspend around him, even when he was playing hurling. And I think it was the same. I think it's the same with the way that he coaches people. He gives people time. He doesn't hustle or hassle anybody. He rarely raises his voice. That's one of the funny things about him. And you listen to people say they rarely hear him curse as well. But when he's, and I just love the way he goes about sport. So much of sport now is so serious, particularly intercounty GA. You know, it's so serious and it's so regimented. And he always had a brilliant sense of humour, but when he needed to, he could totally focus on it. And I think a lot of coaches could learn that from him as well.
His hair is unreal.
Say again?
His hair is unreal.
Lovely hairstyle.
His hair is unreal. You see, if anybody doesn't know him, we're talking Sideshow Bob here. Somebody was suggesting, was it Stephen Miller? Somebody was suggesting as well down in Laois today that they'd need a special sculpture to get his hair up on Mount Rushmore.
The Mere Mortals are pretty cool. Looking at irishrock.org right now and looking at the index of the band, obviously they're a pretty big deal, as you've already touched on, Cliona. I mean, even looking at the lineup that day when they played at Foley, Bob Geldof was actually the headliner that day.
Van Morrison, I think, as well. Yeah.
Right. It's hard to argue against that one as well, Shane, and I think you are going to pop him on. We will get to a debate, I promise, but I think you're going for Critchley as well.
To be honest with Joan, he'd have been my number one.
Right.
Yeah, he was the first name that I would have put down. I mean, I remember listening to your Donegal version of this, I think it was, and one of the guys might have passed comment that if you cut Michael Murphy in two, he'd be Donegal's best and second best footballer. I think if you cut Pat Critchley in two, he would be on this list just for being Pat Critchley the hurler, and then Pat Critchley, who was all these other things. I mean, bear in mind he won the Club All Ireland in football with Portlaoise.
There's only one, yeah.
The basketball achievements that he's had, sensational. And now as a coach, I mean, as somebody myself who's obsessed with coaching and I suppose the pedagogy of coaching and everything that goes with it. I mean, if you go back to Owen's question as to what skill had he that was transferable across all of those, he's a people person, and he's got an unbelievable ability to connect with you, the person, before he even considers you, the athlete. I'm involved with Portlaoise Soccer Club at the moment, and we had a series of seminars where we got a guest in to talk, and we managed to get Pat in, and you know, the manner in which he speaks about connecting with the person first and helping them flourish in their lives, not just in their sport, all of that kind of stuff. I mean, you're hanging on his every word. You're absolutely hanging on his every word. So it's no surprise. I mean, I think recently he won 2 national titles in 2 different sports in the same day there, with the basketball in the school and then with the footballers in Carlow IT, which was phenomenal. Cheddar did a podcast recently there with Brian Carroll, where he spoke about him as a player and how fantastic a player he was. He used one brilliant line. He said, "I've heard midfielders been described as going box to box." He says, Zoom, he said, went from parish to parish. Good way of putting across the energy that he played the game with, you know. And again, the other great thing with him, lads, is he'd be such a respected name around the country in terms of hurling. I mean, he's, you know, very much a foremost thinker. Cliona was talking there about the Satanta program and how he was the driving force behind that. Like I read a piece with Christy O'Connor last year when after we beat Dublin, Christy had a good piece about, well, where did this come from? And he spoke about the Satanta program and spoke about Critchley being the one that was bringing that in. But he also said that in 2014, when things were really struggling at underage level for the Cork hurlers, it was Pat Critchley that the Cork hurlers turned to, looking for information as to, well, how you seem to be doing this a lot better than we are. How are you getting this so right? So look, when Cork hurling knowledge and are coming knocking on your doorstep, you're clearly a highly respected figure, you know, everywhere. He
when he was under 21, I think he was still in college at the time. He played on 15 teams in one season between club, college, and county football, basketball, and hurling. So you know, he was just. To me, like, he is a sporting polyglot in every sense of the word. And I think if every county had a treasure like Pat Critchley, a lot of the nonsense would be stripped away, and just you would be talking about, you know, proper coaching, proper handling of people. And also, I don't know whether you'd agree, Steve, but he also had, to me too, he has that Laois personality. Everything is very on the down low, very understated. And that's why you cling on to every word.
Yeah, I think the phrase "you wouldn't find anybody to have a bad word to say about him" is kind of used too often, but I think it's definitely applicable in Critchley's case. That's for sure.
Well, there's one more spot remaining on Mount Rushmore. I can confirm, ladies and gentlemen, that it's not actually going to be an agreement here. So, Cliona, you may as well proceed and give us your final pick for your Mount Rushmore.
Well, I looked at a lot of people, and I know like Bina McDonald was one that was a huge hero of mine as a GA fan. I also looked obviously at women's GA, and Sue Ramsbottom was sensational for me as well. But I'm plumping for Allison Miller because I think she's somebody who, if you mention Laois sport, her name will come up immediately. Somebody who came to rugby very late in her life. Somebody who's won 2 Six Nations, scored, you know, a hat-trick against England famously the year that Ireland won the Grand Slam, and also scored a try in that famous victory in the World Cup against the All Blacks at the Silver Ferret. So for me, Allison Miller, I think, is one that again represents that eclectic nature of Laois sport, because she didn't start out as a rugby player, and she came to GA very late, but played for Laois GA as well, and was actually a brilliant athlete. She'd won 2 All-Ireland schools 400-metre hurdles titles, and she has that power sprinting ability that you've seen as a rugby player. But I think if you think about Irish rugby, and you mention Allison Miller, everybody knows who you're talking about, and just that trademark speed that she had and that lovely handoff. And I just think she was just one of those players you'd pay in to go to watch.
So she's absolutely class. Like, she's 8 or 9 out of 10 every single game. I'm delighted that you've not only mentioned Cliona, but put her up there. She's like frequently head and shoulders, not only above the opposition, but above her own teammates as well. So
yeah, I think record 24 tries as well, Adrian. Yeah, for Ireland.
I'm not sure which direction Shane is going to go here, by the way, so I don't want to be sort of getting in ahead of him here. But I can't believe how flippantly and briefly you've brushed over Sue Ramsbottom.
Oh, look, I debated long and hard about this, because Sue Ramsbottom again represents everything that was brilliant about Laois for me, because the Laois women were in the vanguard of, like, ladies Gaelic football started in 74, and Laois women were in 6 finals before they finally won one in 2001. And I think she played in at least maybe 7 finals. I think she played in 6 of them, and they lost them, including heartbreaking replays. And so she was finally there. She was there in 2001 and leading, as she always did. I think she scored 7-17 in that season, and she scored maybe four points in play in that final, and she scored some, and some brilliant goals. I remember she scored an amazing goal against Monaghan one year in a drawn final that they lost the replay. Just sensational player, sensational leader, and again, so many people in Laois would mention her in relation to influencing them in sport as well. But I suppose, because I believe that we're trying to get a spread for me, Mount Rushmore is about reflecting a spread of sport, and for that reason I've just plumped for Ali Miller, and the international element of that, I suppose, beforehand. But really, it was neck and neck. I found it hard myself.
She won an All-Ireland club title in 1986 at the age of 12, senior at the age of 12.
She scored a point in it, apparently.
Stop.
Actually, it was the Heath at the time. Yeah, exactly, yeah.
Cliona, we might just get a brief roundup of who else didn't make your mountain before we get Shane's final pick.
Well, Bina McDonald didn't make mine, and but just a sensational footballer, probably the best footballer I saw play for, played for Laois. Famously was a minor. Did the Michael Murphy thing. Was a minor the year that he was first picked for the Laois seniors. Was part of the Laois team that contested 3 and won 2 All Ireland minor finals, and contested an under-21 final, and then part of the great team in 2003 they made the breakthrough at Mico. Just a brilliant player, dual-footed, everything he had about him, and also back to that understated thing about Laois as well. Actually did a really interesting interview recently, I think, on the White Line, that podcast, where he said that he actually suffered from a lot of anxiety, which is really interesting, because he was a guy I felt that could even have been better, and I wasn't sure that he was always played in the right position. But he was definitely one for me. I know Jerry Culleton was mentioned by a few people as well. Played rugby for Ireland, and got banned from playing GA and went back to playing hurling. And led his club to a junior title. There too, that were obviously would have been contenders there. And TJ Downey as well, obviously boxing world champion, is one definitely has to be mentioned.
So Shane, analysing Cliona's final pick with Allison Miller on the mountain, is it going to be something you're going to change, or who had you in mind for your final spot?
Yeah, well, look, I think the first thing to point out is, I don't know what it says about Laois as a sporting county, but we've ended up almost identical. So we have, in that, when push came to shove, I probably had Allison Miller in 5th place. So I did. So it's crazy how similar the two of us have turned out. Again, I'll throw a few names out first, just again in terms of consideration before I come to it. On the hurling front, somebody that Cliona and myself would be aware of Jack Nolan is kind of the Diane of all things GEA down in Laois with us. He would argue, if he was on here now, he would argue very, very, very strongly for Christy O'Brien, who was a phenomenal hurler for Laois. We're going back a bit further, all right, but an absolutely phenomenal hurler for Laois. 18 years with them, massively prominent in Railway Cups, and last year it was absolutely fantastic to see on the day that Laois won the Joe McDonagh last year. Christy was inducted into the Leinster Hurling Hall of Fame, which was absolutely brilliant to see as well. John Taylor, again, you know, Cheddar recently described him as the best player he's ever seen hurled for Laois, so that in itself is saying something. And given the recent success that we've had and how good things went last year, I think if we're doing this in another 5 to 10 years' time, I think Enda Rowland will have a real claim to being up in that list. He's a phenomenal goalkeeper. I think he's the best goalkeeper in the country at the moment. I think he's in an age bracket that he's going to continue to be the best goalkeeper in the country for a few years to come. Football-wise, definitely the two current ones, obviously, were Bino and Ross. But going back a bit further, I think a lot of people would say that Bobby Miller would have a claim to be on it. Nominated for 4 All-Stars in a row in the 70s, and it then also gives us the distinction that I wouldn't think there's too many counties where, you know, if you're doing your top 10, that you'd have a father and daughter combination in your top 10 with Allison obviously already making Cliona's list. Yeah, we unfortunately have no pedigree with soccer. We've had one Irish international, senior Irish international. He's from my own town of Rathdowney, a guy called Tony Byrne. He could pick up 14 caps, would have been 10 years with Southampton. But yeah, aside from that, apart from a couple
if you're claiming Carlos Tommy Murphy, surely you're going to claim Stephen Hunt.
Nah. Look,
I didn't even know he was born in Laois until a few days ago.
Yeah. I know Stephen very, very well. I know him well enough to know that he doesn't consider himself a Laois man. So if he's not considering himself a Laois man, we're definitely not.
I was on to him last night to see was there any case to be made, and he has very fond things to say about it. And his mother's family is from there, but he's very firmly, I think, for the family. And where have you ended up?
Yeah. No, look, the one I've gone with, again, I was kind of looking at the modern era, and it is a name that came back a good bit on Twitter when I threw it out as well. And it's just a guy that I think has gone and been phenomenally successful in leaving our country, is Zach Toohey. I mean, what he's done going across to Australia, I mean, it's the equivalent. The way I'm looking at it is, if we did have a soccer player who went off to England and carved out a phenomenal career for himself in an environment that's as tough as that. And right, you might say, well, there's world stars in the Premier League now, so, you know, he's not competing with world players by playing Aussie rules and playing the AFL. But even if you went back to the Premier League or for old First Division, as it was called in the 80s, I mean, what Zach is doing now, to go across there, I mean, 187 appearances, it leaves him third behind only two men in Jim Steins and Ty Kennelly. It's absolutely phenomenal. And at the moment is still at the height of his powers. I mean, this year they brought back the State of Origin, AFL State of Origin match, and he was the only non-Australian selected in that, in which he gave an absolutely starring performance. He's back fit after he picked up an injury last year, which ended 138 consecutive games. I mean, that in itself is an incredible stat in any sport. So it is. So that caused a bit of a problem for him in 2019. But he's back at the moment. He's with Geelong at the moment, who are kind of third, fourth favourites if their season gets back underway, which I think they're hopeful of. There's a hell of a chance that he will finally win a title this year. And I think if he does, what will happen there is he'll return to Laois and hopefully make a starring role for a couple of years for ourselves before he packs it in. Because, of course, he did win a Leinster minor with Laois before he went across. But absolutely phenomenal athlete. And, I mean, if you throw his name out in Australia amongst that community, they will all say that he is one of the best they've had in the last 5, 6, 7 years. So I think that puts him in with a serious chance of being one of the best we've ever had.
Well, it's in your hands, Shane. If you want to get Zach Toohey onto your Mount Rushmore, you're going to have to remove Tommy Murphy and Keenan Buckley, Pat Critchley or Allison Miller. Are you going to do it?
Can I just say, in the absence of that, like Laois it struck me as the conversation was going along, is an incredible county for female athletes and sports people in a way that I'm not sure we've had replicated up to this point. And outside of sports, some incredibly strong women as well. So what I'm saying to you is, let that influence your decision, Shane.
No, I don't think it should influence his decision. I mean, fair is fair here. This is gender neutral, so it's up to him.
Yeah, no, look, that's absolutely a fair argument. So it is, and look, if there had been a bit more disagreement between myself and Cliona on the other picks, well, then I don't think I would have felt as obliged to try and look outside the box a little bit more and try to go to war for somebody. But yeah, look, I think virtue of the fact that Allison was Cliona's last pick, I suppose that is really the only one that I can challenge. And yeah, I'd be looking to put Zach in ahead of Allison Miller, I suppose, as much and all of the backlash that no doubt I will take for that.
Well, it's a lose-lose situation. Somebody's going to miss out. So just to confirm, the final OTB Laois Mt Rushmore is Tommy...
Unless Owen, and sorry to cut across you, if there's any changes from Cliona's point of view that you would want to make.
Unless I'm agreeing to change here. I'll tell you what, for me, I'm biased. This is absolutely my bad. I don't like the AFL as a game, and so I don't follow it as closely as I should. I didn't know about the State of Origin thing. That's absolutely amazing, because State of Origin is massive. I've been at State of Origin matches in Australia, and there's huge respect there. But he hasn't won an AFL title yet, and for that reason, I think Allison Miller's been part of historic rugby teams representing Ireland, and I think on that basis, I would still keep her on Mount Rushmore for the next 12 months anyway.
Shane does get to make that one change, so if he's insisting on Zach, he is going up. And are you, have you any change to your 4 on that basis, or would you just stick with that and under duress have Allison come off then in place of Zach? Is there agreement on that, in so much as it is?
Well, I don't think you're going to get agreement, that's for sure.
Yeah,
reluctant agreement.
What was it Thatcher said? This lady's not for turning, was it?
and look at that. That's legit. But so you're sticking with your 4. Shane is going to push Zach in there, and he's choosing to do it at Allison's expense, and that's where we're landing, it seems.
Yeah, and look, let the battle begin. We'd love to get loads more input from other sports fans, and obviously from Laois sports fans as well.
Whereabouts in the county is it being etched out, Cliona?
Oh, without a doubt. Never mind Mount Rushmore. It has to be on the Rock of Dunamace. There's no doubt about it. One of the most beautiful parts and places in Laois that, again, like a lot of Laois, like the bogs of Laois and a lot of other things about Laois, is probably underappreciated by other people, because we are in that middle ground in the middle of the country that is, I think, underappreciated. The beautiful Midlands. But the Rock of Dunamace is where I carve it out. At
least it's in Laois as well, Cliona, unlike Tommy Murphy.
There you have it. The Rock of Dunamace, Tommy Murphy and Keenan Buckley, Pat Critchley and Zach Toohey. That's one fine-looking Mount Rushmore. Fair play, folks. That's it for the Laois Mount Rushmore.
OTB AM's Mount Rushmore.